Omarova, in your article, which was published in a law review journal last month, it was entitled "The People's Ledger." That's the title. And you did advocate nationalizing the business of retail banking. In your words, and I quote, "This article outlines a series of structural reforms that would radically redefine the role of a central bank as the ultimate public platform for generating, modulating, and allocating financial resources in a democratic economy, the people's ledger," end quote. You also said this article accordingly advocates full migration of demand deposits onto the Fed's balance sheet. Now, this is meant to create a system. Oh, that's a quote, right? This article accordingly advocates full migration of demand deposits onto the Fed's balance sheet, end quote. According to your article, and I quote, "The proposed reform will effectively end banking." You put "end banking" in quotes, but this is all your quote. "The proposed reform will effectively end banking as we know it." These are all direct quotes. This is not my characterization. Do you stand by these policy proposals that you published last month?
Senator, thank you for your question. So let me give a little bit of the context about this particular paper.
I've very little time, so please be very succinct. I have more questions.
Of course, Senator. So as I said, this paper was written in the context of an ongoing academic debate on how to approach digitizing the dollar, because this seems to be an inevitable solution. The paper seeks to address the implications of that step for the entire financial system. The particular phrase that has attracted so much attention was actually my quoting a title, the title of a book that somebody else wrote about fintech effectively ending banking.
My concern is the phase that's more interesting, not interesting, disturbing to me, isn't necessarily ending banking as we know it, although that's exactly what would happen, but it is your phrase in which, and I'll quote again, "This article accordingly advocates full migration of demand deposits onto the balance sheet." I read a lot of this paper, and it is clear to me that you are not referring exclusively to a central bank digital currency. You're talking about all demand deposits going to the Federal Reserve. Now, are you now saying you're no longer for that?
Senator, what I'm trying to clarify here is the problem this paper was trying to solve. The problem this paper was trying to solve was the fact that if we allow digitization of currency and the issuance of central bank digital currency without thinking through its implications, community banks and mid-sized banks will be put inherently in a losing position.
But Professor Omarova, you've advocated that they lose all their deposits. And then you acknowledge that that means they wouldn't have the resources to lend money. And so you've constructed this whole mechanism whereby they could go to the Fed and get funding to make the loans, provided that they made loans in a fashion that the Fed approved of. I mean, that's the short version. Let me go on to another quote. Because this is right from that very same article published last month. You said, and I quote, "In principle, Fed accounts can be made available as an alternative to bank deposit accounts upon a person's request. As explained below, however, the more effective option would be to transition all deposits to the Fed." That sounds pretty straightforward. When you use words like advocate, and you talk about the proposal, and you talk about a preferred option, it sounds like that's what you were for. Are you no longer for those things?
Senator, being a legal academic, there is a particular way we write our ideas. Unlike economists, for example, we cannot simply claim it's an assumption and there is a model. So having said that, I just want to clarify, my job as an academic was to expand the boundaries of the academic debate and outline potential options for Congress to consider. This is entirely up to Congress whether or not to go that route.
Sure, of course, ultimately. But this is what you recommended, and it doesn't seem to be a coincidence that every one of these thought experiments or academic ideas, every one of them, involved dramatic expansion in the power and control of the central government to allocate resources to control banking, and a corresponding diminution in the freedom of individual Americans and institutions. That's the common theme that comes up again and again and again. You use words like advocate, your preference. I mean, to suggest now that well, maybe you're not really for these things. It's just hard. It's hard to believe this. We'll have more time in the second round, but I want to underscore the powers of the comptroller of the currency are enormous. Powers to decide who gets to open a bank account and who doesn't, what kind of loans can and can't be offered. The opportunity to exercise a radical ideology through the powers of the comptroller of the currency are chilling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.